Welcome back to another episode of Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means and Nathan Baird. And fall camp starts this week. And so we'll spend the next 2 days previewing fall camp, just discussing some of the stuff we're intrigued by, some of the questions. We'll hold off on the quarterback stuff, though, because we're supposed to talk with Ryan Day and all three quarterbacks Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon. So we'll come back with that after we talk to those guys, because there's no reason for us to repeat ourselves, especially because the only question that matters with quarterbacks right now is who's going to be the starter. So we'll come back to that. So we'll discuss on this Tuesday pod, you're getting this afternoon, we'll discuss basically the rest of the offense. What questions do you have? Offensive line, tight ends, running backs, wide receivers, we'll discuss that. But first, some recruiting stuff, because it has been an eventful, really 3, 4, 5 days of recruiting stuff for Ohio State, really going back to last Friday, if we're being honest here. They get Chris Henry, the first commitment of their 2026 class. Chris Henry Jr., the son of the late Chris Henry Sr., who played for the Cincinnati Bengals in the 2000s, who has been living with Adam Pac-Man Jones since his father's passing, has developed into the type of recruit who, I've kind of been saying this in texting this out the last year and a half, so since he got the offer. This is a kid who's probably going to be a 5-star recruit when those 2026 recruiting rankings do come out. He's about 6'5", 185 pounds. He's in the same mold as receiver as a guy like Marvin Harrison we're seeing right now, or Jeremiah Smith in the 2024 class, the top wide receiver there. So he showed up on Friday for Ohio State Summerfest, which is just, you get this little small window at the end of July where you can have kids on campus, and sometimes there's some big names there. For the most part, it's typically for Ohio State a lot of in-state kids. You know, they look forward to the future with that. If they just spent all of June worried about the current class and trying to build that class with official visits, they typically look forward to the future with this little window here with the Summerfest thing. And we don't typically get to do this. We don't typically get to, wait around for these kids' visits to end like you see at some other schools and talk to them. But Ohio State let us do that this time. And it's probably because it's kids who are younger and aren't necessarily having to make decisions right now. So Chris Henry walks out of the Woody, and we're all standing there. It's about 4 or 5 media members. It's not the biggest thing in the world. And he's like, yeah, I'll give you guys some of my time. And so he starts talking to all of us about how the visit went. And for those who have never seen Chris talk or have never had a chance to meet him, he's not the loudest, most, out there kid. He's really to himself and a reserves type of guy. And so he's also young, so he's not putting together the best sentences, but he's just saying the visit went good. Every time he comes back here, he feels even more and more like Brian Hartline is his coach already. He loves what's going on here. But he has said a couple of times, even back when he camped back in June, that he was going to take his time with this decision here. He wasn't going to rush anything, and he didn't have to because he's only about to be a sophomore in high school, which tells you how good he was last summer when he was coming into high school. And Brian Hartline's walking past me and he goes, I just offered an 8th grader. And that was Chris Henry. And so a year later, he's at this visit. He's kind of teasing the idea that maybe Ohio State's in the league, but he's not really saying much. And then Adam Pac-Man Jones, who was here on the visit with him, which Chris said he wanted him to see things at this point because Adam has been the one who's been telling him to slow it down and not rush into anything. And so this was the first time Pac-Man Jones was up here with him. For those who don't know, Adam Pac-Man Jones, the former NFL player, the former cornerback. Chris and Pac-Man pulled up in this blue and white Rolls Royce that only an NFL player would pull up to the Woody in. And while we're interviewing Chris, Pac-Man shouts over from the sideline, so what we doing? And Chris looks over at him and he starts laughing a little bit. And he goes, come on, man, we going to tell the people what you're doing or not? We committing or what? And Chris is like, I don't know. I guess we'll see. He's like, come on, man, spit it out. This isn't my choice. This is your choice. Spit it out. And so off the cuff, clearly not planned, Chris Henry decides to commit to Ohio State, which is, at least since I've been on the beat, the most organic, spur-of-the-moment commitment I've seen. I wasn't here yet on the beat the summer of 2016 when Chase Young committed at a Friday Night Lights thing. But, yeah, that kind of kicks off Ohio State's 2026 class. Nathan, are you surprised at all that the first commitment in a class for Ohio State is a wide receiver?
No. No. What? There's always going to be like 3 in every class, so the odds
Yeah.
of a wide receiver being the first commit is pretty high, right? No, not surprised at all. It's probably significant, though. We've seen a couple times in recent history where the first commit is not necessarily a marquee name at a marquee position. So I'm curious what this could mean for this class to check that box immediately, to start a momentum that early with a name like this. As we're going to talk a little later, though, no one's worried about Ohio State's receiver recruiting. It's great that they got Chris Henry. He can probably do some amazing things for them, but it would have been maybe more useful if you're talking about like what impact the first commit can make on a class. Maybe getting a marquee defensive player would have done the same thing. But let's be honest, that doesn't necessarily happen this far. The position where you're more likely to have a dude who could like create some headlines, it's quarterback and receiver. So there are things that Ohio State can now maybe use this commitment to help build the rest of their class just on name recognition alone.
Yeah, I think the only two things that matter, well, all of it matters. This dude might be a 5-star recruit. The most important things here, and it'll help what you said earlier, that receiver recruiting is not an issue. He's from Ohio, and he's going to be a highly rated kid. And also, to the mold of Marvin Harrison Jr., Jeremiah Smith, there is something there with Heartline. These kids who have NFL ties from their family, Jeremiah Smith is the cousin of Geno Smith, the current Seahawks quarterback. And then obviously Marvin Harrison Jr., I think we've all heard of his father before. And then Chris Henry. These are 3 guys who they chose a guy who also played the position in the NFL, but they chose an NFL player who kind of can speak the way they maybe grew up listening to people talk to them. I think that matters. And as we get into some of the other news here, the fact that he's from Ohio, this is the first time it's been a class for Ohio State has been started by an Ohio kid since 2022 when Jair Brown, even though he was technically still living in Louisiana, he was on his way to move back to Cincinnati at the time. He started that class off. That ended up being a pretty decent quality class. Jack Sawyer started off the 2021 class that ended up being the number 2 class in the country and one of the more highly rated classes Ohio State's had in the modern era. Paris Johnson started off the 2020 class, and that class ended up being quality, even if it was a change of the guard. And so Ryan Day, was still trying to get his feet wet under him a little bit there. As we get into what happened next, we see once again what happens when you don't start a class with an Ohio guy. The 23 class didn't start off with an Ohio guy. It started with tight end Ty Lockwood, who eventually flips to Alabama. The 24 class started with Dylan Raiola, who eventually decommits and flips to Georgia. And now you have the 2025 class. So a year ago to the date, actually, and I remember this because I was in the same place both times it happened. I was at the Ohio State Fair, so clearly I'm not allowed to go to the Ohio State Fairs on Saturdays. Well, it doesn't matter now because Andrew's going to cover this stuff. Jontae Gilbert, he is now the number 25 player and the number 2 safety in the 2025 recruiting class, a 5-star recruit. Out of nowhere, he committed to Ohio State a year ago on Saturday. This was this past Saturday. What was this? July 29th. He committed to Ohio State a year ago to that day. And in the moment, it seemed weird. You understand the talent-wise, you get why Ohio State has said yes. You can't say no to guys, which is when people ask, why do you take commitments from people so early? Because you can't say no, because then you automatically remove yourself from the conversation. So you just got to hope it sticks. Sometimes it does when you get guys like Sean Wade who commit so early as a SEC DB and he sticks and makes it all the way here. Sometimes it doesn't stick. Guys like Jordan Battle, Jaheim Singletary. Jontae Gilbert is now in the same situation as the latter, where a year later to the date, he announces that he has decommitted from Ohio State. And what are we supposed to make of that, Nathan? Should we just chalk that up to this kid was never going to make it basically 2.5 years of signing day at Ohio State when he's living literally in Atlanta, Georgia? Or is there a bigger issue here that Ohio State's defensive recruiting has still not quite gotten it right?
I'm not sure both aren't true, to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to give the hedged out answer there. I mean, again, as you said, the day that he committed, I think the context around that commitment was, we'll see. Like, it seems like very much a precarious pen that's been placed in this post-it on the wall in the Woody, that they've got a commitment from this guy. And that is not any kind of a character judgment on the player in question. It's just like, that is a long time to hold anybody's commitment, let alone, I mean, it's kind of a long time to hold a commitment from somebody in Ohio, depending on what else happens with the dynamics of your class. Like, you take an offensive lineman who's ranked in the 300s to start your class, even from Ohio, and does he get to signing day 2.5 years later because you you find 4 other offensive linemen ranked higher in that class? You know what I'm saying? So anybody, 2.5 years is a long time, I think, to hold a verbal. And when it was a player of this caliber, you know that they're just going to get bombarded the whole time. And regionally, there was going to be some pull. So now, having said all that, it's Ohio State's defensive recruiting is not in a place where you can, I mean, those are all legitimate reasons / excuses why a guy didn't hold his commitment. And I'm assuming they'll keep recruiting him, and maybe he ends up coming here. I don't know. But
of course,
but you can't really like excuse out too much right now with Ohio State defensive recruiting. Like, they just need more wins. And I'm the guy who gets very tied up in the, let's not call it even wins and losses. I think sometimes that's a wrong way to frame it. These are all individual decisions, which is true. Individual decisions being made by 16, 17-year-old people that there's some variance there on how they feel week to week. But the plain truth of it is, one side of the ball has lagged behind the other significantly as far as attracting talent and signing talent and developing talent. Like, there is a deficiency there. As much as Ohio State fans are excited about Sonny Styles and CJ Hicks, and as much as we're talking about the 3-star edge rushers and defensive linemen who might be leading this thing this coming year, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in conjunction with another player, obviously, but they just need more wins on defense. They need more. I've always been a little bit suspect about the concept of momentum, but I think maybe they need some momentum on defense. They need the guy who really tips the dominoes. And the Aaron Scott commitment happening at the same time is huge. And we can just transition into talking about that. Because with Gilbert, I don't know that there's a great analysis to happen. It was just a long time to try to keep a commitment of that player from that region. Getting Aaron Scott in tandem with West, and now kind of completing that big positional need, is important. And it's something Ohio State needs to replicate at other positions on this defense.
Aaron Scott out of Springfield, Ohio, the number 52 player, the number 5 cornerback in that 2024 class. Yeah, Gilbert is just part of the story of what's been a roller coaster of recruiting emotions for fans the last 5 days, where it's like, one day it's like, oh my God, we just did something crazy. Next day it's, what is going on? The next day it's, thank God we got this guy. And then we'll continue on this roller coaster. I went to Aaron Scott's commitment. I thought it was in line with what we've kind of seen from this class for Ohio State. These kids are not afraid to troll Michigan. I thought it was, I mean, you got to listen, this is your moment. Not everybody gets to do this. And so how you decide to do it, that's completely up to you. Even if, guys like me would just rather you just come out and make the decision. You just deserve to enjoy your moment however you want to do it. So the Aaron Scott, I'll paint another picture since that's what we're doing today. We're painting pictures of how kids end up at Ohio State. I get there. It's out of the community center in Springfield. It's not like deep into Springfield. It's right near the freeway. And there's a banner behind him of Oregon color, I think was on the left of me. Michigan was in the middle. Ohio State was on the right. And then his parents came out with these bags. And it was a Michigan bag, an Oregon bag, and Ohio State bag. And he went through the whole thing of, first he got rid of the Oregon bag. First of all, he didn't give anything away pre the decision, at least from what he was wearing. When I first pulled up, he had on this all pink suit, this all pink outfit with white Air Force Ones on. So he's still not giving anything away. And then eventually he changed into just a white T-shirt. So he didn't give anything away whatsoever. So kudos to him for, going down to the wire with this. And so first he gets rid of the Oregon bag, which was probably on brand. Oregon, I talked to some people other than just him, but also talking to him. Oregon was clearly just a hat on the table. It wasn't a real thing. It was more of he grew up. You got to remember, this kid was a young kid really getting into college football around the time when Oregon and the jerseys and Marcus Mariota, and DeAnthony Thomas, back when Oregon was a legitimate playoff team. And when the Chip Kelly era is when he really started watching college football. And so that was his favorite team growing up. And so, yes, it was cool that he got to go out there on those visits and wear the jerseys and do all that stuff. But this has always felt like it was a Michigan and Ohio State race. And how this played out on Sunday evening confirmed that. So he gets rid of the Oregon bag, and then he picks up the Ohio State bag, and he gets rid of that. So now he's doing this on his Instagram Live, by the way. So if you're a fan watching this, you're thinking, here we go again. Ohio State's about to lose another defensive recruit to somebody, and this time it's your rival coming into your backyard. What is going on with our defensive recruiting? And so then he picks up the Michigan bag. He kind of shows it off just a little bit before opening it up and pulling out this Ohio State number 5 jersey and officially commits to Ohio State at that point. And so in a way kind of trolls Michigan while picking Ohio State, which was a cool moment. But it also, as I wrote on the site, was a reflection of how this recruitment actually played out. He told me going into his official visit that last weekend where Ohio State landed all but one of those guys, and that's Kingston Vialamuasa, who ended up at Notre Dame. He thought he was going to Michigan. He was pro-Michigan. Michigan was in the lead, and Ohio State was going to have to do a lot to change that in his mind. And a couple of things happened during that visit, whether it was getting back around Ryan Day and Ryan Day telling him it's been a while since you've been here, how's it feel to be back here? And just that relationship, obviously the Tim Walton relationship, and they call him OG Walt within the program. Watching Bryce West and Miles Lockhart, the other 2 cornerbacks in this class, commit that day in person, even if one waited a week to make it public, watching that happen, all of that really started to shift some things in his head, and where the idea of the Ohio's best stay home and play for Ohio State, he wasn't dismissing that idea anymore, and he was actually coming around to the idea of doing that. Plus, just wanting to play with Bryce West at the college level, that put Ohio State over the top here. So like you said, that's a big pickup. Ohio State might need to reset this cornerback room here very fast if Denzel Burke decides that he's done after being a 3-year starter and goes pro. What if Jordan Hancock is literally the Marshawn Lattimore Award, and so he goes pro after this year? That leaves you Davison Igbinosun, and that leaves you Jair Brown as guys who will, coming out of this year, probably play meaningful snaps for you. You're going to need to set up your future, and now you've done that with Aaron Scott and Bryce West as outside corners, while Miles Lockhart is viewed more like a nickel.
Right, and it's where they are doing what they need to do in a more concrete way than at defensive end. Like, you can make a comparison directly, right? Like, we're defensive end, like, we know these guys are probably gone. We know JT Tuimoloau more than likely is probably in the NFL this time next year. Maybe Jack Sawyer, we don't know. Maybe some of the guys on this defensive line, and they're filling in, they're backfilling at corner better than they're backfilling on the defensive line. And we're looking at a situation for 2023. One of the reasons people are intrigued by this defense is because they may finally get back to that cohesion between, not promoting a collective there, the cohesion between the defensive line, between the pass rush and the coverage, that hasn't really worked in unison now for 4 years, 3 years, I guess you would say. 2019, good. 2020 through 2022, So you're about to maybe see it on the field, and I think if I was a fan, I would start to feel some trepidation about, is all that going to just collapse after 1 year, and you're going to go back to now kind of grasping at straws or the transfer portal or whatever to try to fix some of those deficiencies? You don't. I think the frustrating thing too for fans is you don't need that many successes to kind of keep things on the right track, right? Like if they'd had like one more offensive tackle recruiting success in the past 3 years, how different we'd be talking about this team if they'd had one more edge rushing success. Now, the other thing to remember here too is they do have Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry, who are both thought of as pretty high ceiling guys and who are maybe very close to being here and ready to go this fall and being in that rotation. Amari Abor a little bit maybe farther back, injured last year. We don't know that he's quite on the cusp the way those other two guys are, but those are your maybe big 2024 bookends up front. But corner is where you see, I think, a more what do you want to say? Like a more seamless transition maybe to the next generation of guys who are going to be able to step up and play at a Big Ten level.
You see life after those guys, even the second-year guys. And I know you brought up Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry, but they're going to be third-year guys next year. They're very quickly going to be the older statement. So you got to see what life is after that, and which can get us in this Dylan Stewart. Weird month for defensive line recruiting. You start off the month with nobody thought Justin Scott was coming to Ohio State. That's just, he didn't even think that. To the point of Aaron Scott, he thought he was going to Michigan. The world thought he was maybe going to Notre Dame or somewhere in the SEC, but it just wasn't Ohio State. That wasn't on the table. All of a sudden, July 2nd rolls around, and he picks Ohio State. And it's like, whoa. It feels like anything is possible now. You just got the number 14 player, the number 3 defensive lineman in the country who might be the best interior defensive lineman, period, regardless of what the classifications on 247 call people. He might be the best defensive tackle in the country. That's a big pickup. It's been a while since you've had a big pickup on the defensive tackle side from a 5-star standpoint. Mike Call was maybe the closest back in 2021, but it's been since Teron Vincent in 2018 that you brought in a 5-star surefire defensive tackle. And obviously Teron Vincent didn't work out because of injuries and whatnot, but we'll see. Justin Scott seems like a guy who by year 2, he should be on the interior dominating for you. So that's a big way to start that off. And then it felt like all this momentum started coming for some of these defensive linemen. You thought you had Marquise Lightfoot in the bag, number 62 player, number 5 edge rusher, who might have actually just been a silent commit for you. You thought you had maybe a more developmental guy, but a guy that you were high on in Jaden Jackson, the number 445 player, number 45 defensive lineman, as another interior guy for you. You think right now, Edric Houston, maybe you're in the lead, but you're fighting Alabama and Clemson for the number 22 player, the number 5 defensive lineman, as a guy who can play on the edge and in the interior for you. And South Carolina had been in the lead for Dylan Stewart, the number 10 player, the number 2 edge rusher in the country. But it felt like Ohio State had started creeping. As a matter of fact, there were some who felt like when he took an unofficial visit in the spring to Ohio State had started knocking on that door. And then over the summer, maybe some things started to flip. Well, that momentum that you kept creeping on has not turned into anything, as Dylan Stewart, as of Tuesday morning, has committed to South Carolina, which has always been the perceived favorite. And so, okay, you lost that one there. On its own, to your point, Nathan, individually, it's tough that you didn't get a 5-star out of DC, out of the DMV area, but maybe you live with it. But when you stacked it on top of the fact that you lost Jaden Jackson to Oklahoma, that you lost Marquise Lightfoot to Miami, though that one feels NIL driven, and given what's going on in Miami right now with some of that stuff and their boosters, we'll see what happens with Miami's class over the next 6 months. But right now, he's still committed to Miami. It puts a lot of pressure on when Edric Houston makes his decision on August 22nd, that one goes your way, because 2 weeks ago, this felt a month ago, actually, when Justin Scott committed, it felt like you just put yourself in the position to have maybe your most impressive, from a star rating standpoint, defensive line class since that 2021 class when you had JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer and Mike Hall and Tyleek Williams, and maybe even better if you've got 3 5-stars in it, to now it's like, okay, get Edric Houston or where you're going to go after that. And so I want you, Nathan, to react to that, but then also Ryan Day reset the defensive assistant coaching staff again after the 2021 season. And it felt like, okay, Tim Walton should be able to do X, Y, and Z on the recruiting trail because he's got the Jalen Ramsey stamp, but also he played here, but he's been in the South for so long, both at the NFL and college level, that maybe he's got some ties and things down there. Perry Eliano, it felt like that dude has all the potential in the world to be an elite assistant coach, especially now that he's at a school where he has every resource he could possibly need. Jim Knowles doesn't really recruit well, so whatever there, but then you just brought in James Laurinaitis to maybe kind of tamper that a little bit, especially if you can get kids on campus. But even then, there's still so much he can do. Larry Johnson is, after coming off a 2023 class where he whiffed, if we're just going to be honest about this, and right now his only commit is a kid from the Big Ten footprint who it shouldn't have been a surprise that you got him. Does it feel like 2 cycles into this, Tim Walton is the only one who has validated Ryan Day hiring him from a recruiting standpoint?
Sure. Yeah. And I guess that would even extend to the retention of Larry Johnson, right? Like that's kind of what you're getting at here. And listen, I just, we talk, one of the staples of Buckeye Talk is that we're not here setting unreasonable expectations. We're trying to put things in the right perspective and the right context. But the context at Ohio State is you land the best players in the country because that's how you win national championships. Like it doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen by voodoo, and it doesn't happen by getting a bunch of try-hard 3-stars who love Ohio and you make them better than they are. Like you have to get the best players in the country. And that's the standard that was set here by Larry Johnson for a long time. So it feels like we're walking towards the way that we've talked about the end of the Greg Studrawa situation, which is undeniably look at last year's team, undeniably, or last couple years, but I mean, especially last year's team. Paris Johnson Jr., Greg Studrawa recruit, with big help from Ryan Day, having to convince him to come and everything. But understand, you're saying where I'm going. DeJuan Jones, Greg Studrawa, like identified a diamond in the rough, developed him, got the job done. Luke Whippler, Greg Studrawa, like that's 3 NFL draft picks that were on excuse me.
The ghost of Greg Studrawa is entering Nathan Baird right now as he tries to talk.
Maybe, yeah, kind of, yeah. I was getting a little raspy. That is not me trying to do an impression, though we will get to those down the line, I hope. But that was not, it was accidental. And I apologize. I believe earlier with this new mic that I'm using, the Doug Lamereese Memorial mic, I believe I tried to mute myself and then unmuted it and coughed. So you probably all heard me cough earlier. And you definitely just heard me clear my throat right now. All professional Buckeye Talk. But you see what I'm saying? Like we're getting to this point where like undeniably the talent's here. So, I mean, JT Tuimoloau, Jack Sawyer, Kenyatta Jackson, Caden Curry, all those guys we're talking about, like they're here. They're going to help this team be really good. But when you look just into the next year, just 2 years down the line, and you're not seeing the backfill, it's a problem. And you've got to start landing guys of that caliber. Like this isn't, it's great that you get the in-state guys, but there isn't a Jack Sawyer in every class who is close enough that you can like yell out your window at him to check and make sure he's still committed. Like you've got to go beat the bushes and find these guys nationally. And listen, no one is denying that Larry Johnson did that and developed those guys at a rate and to an extent that few people in the history of college football can match. Like all props to that. But we're talking about now, and now there's a lull. So I think you're right. I think there is now a lot of pressure on the Houston commit. And if that doesn't go Ohio State's way, then this seems like back-to-back cycles with just a kind of a big zilch that, or not, man, I guess not maybe a zilch, but not A level recruiting, something lower on the grade scale, and we can adjudicate that when it comes to it, I suppose. But it's not the step forward that you wanted. And again, I think all of these are individual decisions. It's not like we sometimes frame recruiting a little bit the wrong way. I don't think it's about whether you won this decision, but it's about your broader strategy and whether or not you are whether or not you have the right approach in place to finish some of these off. Because to some extent, it is a competition. I think coaches would tell you both. I think coaches would tell you that it is both, individual decisions. It's unpredictable. You do the best you can. I think they would also tell you, though, you got to go into those areas where the best players in the country exist and grew up and were developed, and bring some of them to Ohio, or this thing isn't going to work.
Yeah, the Greg Sadrawa thing is a great point. Mad respect to Greg Sadrawa for what he did while he was in his career. But this isn't a business. This isn't a business of like what your resume is. It's what have you done lately? And we're coming up on 2 years in a row where Larry Johnson isn't getting it done to the level that Larry Johnson set the standard for himself when he went out and got Chase Young, when he pulled JT Tuimoloau out from Washington. He set that standard for himself, and he's got to continue to do that. Or at some point, when it's shown time after time that he can't do that, where does Ryan Day go from there? So that's where Ohio State's class is. It's still the number 2 class in the country. 19 commits in it, right behind Georgia, worth 289.35 points. But it is the highest average star rating class. I know Ryan Day, every signing day, likes to bring up, quality over quantity. They're in a situation. I mean, the other top 5, Georgia's got 26 commitment right now. Florida's got 21. Michigan's got 26. Penn State's got 24. Ohio State has an average star rating of 93.54. That's the highest of anybody. And they also have the most 5 stars committed with 4 right now. So the quality is there. The quantity is not. And you might need both in a year where if this 2021 class is what we thought it was when it signed, a lot of those guys might be out the door in 6 months from now, and you're going to need to find a way to replace that. When we come back here on Buckeye Talk, offense, fall camp preview, what are some things that Nathan and I and the Texters, because I did ask the Texters for some of the stuff they're intrigued for as well, what are they most interested in as Ohio State starts fall camp on Thursday? More on that when we return here on Buckeye Talk.